Before Yoshi's Crafted World came out, I considered myself a huge fan of the Yoshi games, despite not really liking Yoshi's Island, Island DS. New Island was okay, but more so just there, nothing particularly enjoyable. On the other hand, Yoshi's Woolly World is one of my favorite games ever, which solidified my love-hate relationship for the series. On one hand, I like how unique the 2D formula feels from the typical 2D Mario platformer style, but on the other hand, none of the games seem to differentiate from one another too much. The only real differences from the original are the different level choice system and bosses in Yoshi's Story, the babies in Yoshi's Island DS, which only served as an annoying gimmick, the quite frankly interesting art style and musical choices in New Island, and nothing much in Yoshi's Woolly World apart from the obvious wool theming. Now, if you'll remember, I covered Yoshi's Woolly World previously on the channel nearly a year ago now. Yikes, time flies fast. Needless to say, once Yoshi's Crafted World came out, I was rushing to get my review on the game done, and now I can easily say that that was a horrendous decision because of my heavy bias for Woolly World leaking into my original script. So considering how I feel about all of the other Yoshi games currently, what about Yoshi's Crafted World? Well, before we can get to that, let's go over the story, because, you know, Yoshi games are well known most for their stories. Once again, the Yoshis are lounging around, not really doing much, whenever Kamek comes out of nowhere to make their lives that much worse. This time around, Kamek is after the Yoshi's prized Sundream Stone, which can grant any of the Yuzu's wildest wishes. Worst comes to worst, and the Sundream Stone self-destructs to keep Kamek from stealing it, leaving the Yoshis, Kamek, and Baby Bowser in a race of epic proportions to retrieve all 5 Dream Gems and return home safely. Once again, another simplistic yet good Yoshi story. And if there was anything that made me really hyped to play the rest of the game, it was certainly the presentation, because everything in this cutscene looked really good. If you couldn't tell already, the game is going for a diorama style which will be consistent throughout all of the levels in the game. Not to mention it's implemented into the gameplay in a very clever way. The way in question is a new type of collectible, crafts, but we'll get into that in a bit. First, while we're still on the topic of the presentation, let's talk about the music.
It sounds like a tiger scraping its claws on a chalkboard or children scream. You're stupid dumb.
Okay, yeah, I've gotta calm down. The soundtrack is mediocre at best. Initially, I would have said that it could have burned in the fiery depths of hell, but I've grown to hate it a tiny bit less. Honestly, it takes all of the wrong ideas from previous Yoshi soundtracks, easily making it one of, if not my least favorite in the series. Yes, even including Yoshi Touch and Go. I might not have played it, but I have skimmed through its OST on occasion, and yeah, it's kinda sad if I'm gonna be honest. Possibly the biggest factor in Crafted World's OST being so mediocre is definitely Tomoyo Tomita not composing it. If you weren't aware, Tomoya composed most if not all of Woolly World's OST, as well as other Nintendo games such as Kirby's Epic Yarn and Wario Land Shake It, and I think that speaks for itself. Woolly World's soundtrack is filled to the brim with beautiful pieces. I seriously don't think I could name a single song in it to be my all-time favorite, like, they're just all too good. However, in 2017, Tomoya left Goodfield to become a freelance composer, and it's really not hard to tell that Crafted World's OST was affected by that. It's a bit strange to me that Goodfield didn't even reach out to him given just how good of a job he did with Woolly World's soundtrack, but I guess we'll never know why. And I think another factor setting back Crafted World's OST is the main theme. By itself, it isn't terrible, but the problem is that 80% of the soundtrack contains remixes of it. Take a listen to Exhibit A. Okay, now take a listen to every other song in the soundtrack. Do you see the problem now? Like I said, by itself it's not that bad, but hearing it over and over and over and over and over again just makes it so obnoxious as you keep playing. Look, I wasn't expecting anything amazing, especially after I heard about how short the soundtrack was going to be, but to say the least, hearing this after loving Woolly World's music so much was a real letdown. And with that little rant out of the way, let's talk about the gameplay. Yoshi retains all of his moves from previous Yoshi games, so I don't have anything to complain about there. The biggest change here is that due to the crafts which I mentioned earlier, you can now aim your egg throw freely without timing the throw, although this does mean that you can no longer move around while aiming, and I get it, but there are a few parts in the game where the option would be nice. Now about the crafts. The crafts are an addition to the quite hefty list of collectibles in Crafted World. To get them, you'll first have to talk to one of these cardboard people, then they'll tell you some random object or objects that they want in a specified level. After that, it's up to you to find them. Most if not all of the crafts will be found in the background, so a careful eye will be needed to spot any of them quickly. Now, a part of me does like this addition because it gives you a lot more reason to go back to the previous stages. However, I will recommend that you don't do too many craft hunts in a row, because it can become very repetitive going through stages over and over again. In fact, searching for them almost made me completely drop the game just because of how tired I was getting from spending so long in each stage searching for them. Not to mention it gave me headaches on multiple occasions due to me having to squint at the screen. Don't get me wrong though, they aren't terrible, I'm just really conflicted on how to feel about them. And about that hefty list of collectibles I mentioned earlier. Yeah, there's a ton of things to collect in this game. There are, of course, the staple red coins and flowers, then the crafts, costumes, Poochie Pups, and after you beat the game, there's a box kid you have to find in every stage. Okay, well I guess technically doing hide and seek to find a box kid isn't a collectible, but whatever, I'm counting it anyway, so shut up! Speaking of which, I really don't like how he's placed in stages. He's treated like a craft where he'll either be in the foreground or background, but the thing is, he's pretty small, so in some stages he'll be much harder to find than in others. Seriously, there's some levels where he's right in plain sight, and others where I could swear up and down that he's just not there at all. I spent like 10 minutes once going through an entire stage and then going through it backwards very slowly, and I still didn't see him. I don't know, I can see what they were going for, but man, it's annoying to find. Another new addition is the ability to go through the flip side of a stage. It's basically exactly what it sounds like. You go through the stage again, but backwards, except on the flip side of a stage, you'll have to look out for the Poochie Pups, at least if you want some extra flowers. I feel like this could have opened the door for some more creative level design for the flip side stages to take advantage of, but it's left with some missed opportunity. The way the game handles it is fine, but I never find myself playing the flip sides of stages because, well, why should I? The game gives you little reason to if you're not going for 100% completion, and that is a bit confusing whenever you consider how the game initially advertised it so prominently. Like, I got the impression that it would have been a pretty big feature, but not really. Moving on, the level design is pretty decent overall. There are a lot of creative level ideas used throughout the game, and I really don't have an issue with most of them, although I do think this is a trade-off for the transformation minigames from previous Yoshi games, which I won't lie, I do miss. I will say this though, I preferred level links in Crafted World over Woolly World. Reason being, some levels in Woolly World overstayed their welcome, while in Crafted World, the levels are just about the perfect length, not being too long or too short. And as opposed to having all traditional levels like in any other Yoshi game, Yoshi's Crafted World changes things up a bit by including a lot of levels that follow by their own gimmicks. For example, one of my personal favorite of these levels is one where you're taking part in a race against a few other cars for flowers. Getting first will of course grant you all of the flowers, but if you want it, then you'll have to avoid all shady spots since your car is purely solar powered. Then there's a level in the Rumble Jungle that basically just takes you on a wildlife tour, giving you the task of hitting as many cardboard animal cutouts as possible for more points to get, you guessed it, flowers. Initially, I didn't appreciate these levels as much as I thought I would, but I've grown to like the variety it gives the game overall, and for that matter, the entire Yoshi series. For years, the games have been mostly doing the same thing in terms of level design, only changing things up in the instance of a transformation room or whenever entering a metamorphosis bubble. Yes, I definitely know what those were called, and I totally didn't just look up a wiki, thank you very much. So in terms of level variety, Crafted World does try to bring more to the table, which is commendable, but there's still plenty of room for improvement here. And this brings me to the bosses. They're fine, if a little too easy at times. Yeah, I honestly don't have a whole lot else to say about them. They're alright, but really nothing to write home about. And it doesn't help much that once again old bosses have been reused, taking up 3 of the 5 main boss slots. I mean, in all honesty, it's not even a big deal. Their attack patterns are even pretty different for once. It's just bothersome to me that they could have been swapped out for new characters or enemies that haven't ever gotten a chance to shine, but they just chose not to. However, it is physically impossible to not appreciate the detail that went into the boss transformation cutscenes. It's really hard for me to pick a favorite, but they're all great. Getting back to the bosses though, I think my ranking for each of the main ones would probably be something like Spike at the top, then Gator Train, Tin Cane Condor, Bert the Ball, and as for the final boss... Oh yeah, right, spoilers in case you care about it because... yeah, it's just Baby Bowser again. Thankfully, this time around it's actually an okay fight, though quite frankly I didn't expect much after Woolly World's underwhelming Baby Bowser fight, but I'll give it credit, it isn't grouped in with a long final level, so that's a plus. The fight has 2 phases, each requiring you to damage Baby Bowser 3 times to continue. Phase 1 is a little unclear with what you're supposed to do. Basically, Baby Bowser does a vroom with each of his cardboard cars on his arms, and you have to destroy them to open his mech suit up and subsequently ground pound him. Do that 3 times and you're at the second phase where you do basically the same thing, but this time he's a big boy and his attacks are slightly more difficult to dodge. Well, all of them except the Meteor Attack, which can literally be avoided by standing in the middle of the stage. Great design, guys, make the attack look complex and hard to avoid, but in reality all you have to do is stand still. After once again attacking him 3 times, the Yoshis all awkwardly stare at Bowser and feel no remorse for beating a child to the ground, Kamek glides off with Bowser, and finally the Sundream Stone gets restored and the Yoshis go home in a weird mess of a flying boat. And that was Yoshi's Crafted World. At the end of it all, I'm left feeling a bit conflicted about the game. Crafted World presents a creative gimmick with flipping stages backwards, but nothing much is done with it, and I think that can be said for the game overall. It brings a lot more levels with differing objectives and ideas, which in a way is a breath of fresh air, but at the same time I can't help but feel like I'd rather be playing Woolly World. The levels may get a tad lengthy at points, but I don't personally remember myself getting tired of the game at any points, and I really can't say the same for Crafted World. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I almost didn't even finish the game at all, and while yes, that was partially my own fault due to how many craft hunts I was doing, I just grew tired of the game at that point and was ready for it to end. And even then, if a collectible isn't fun or inherently satisfying to collect, then I feel like the game is also somewhat at fault. After a while, the satisfaction from getting another flower or craft or whatever just goes away because of how little it feels in the grand scheme of things, simply because of how many things there are to collect in the game. If you're one of those insane people that somehow enjoys looking for crafts, then you'll probably have a blast to 100%ing Crafted World. But personally, if I'm not recording footage, then I won't bother. But here's to hoping that Yoshi's Crafted World opens the door for even more creativity and a more balanced, uniquely fun adventure. But if I see some form of Bowser as the final boss again, so help me, I'll...
Yoshi's Crappy World?